Hi everyone, my name is Leah Kopke and I'm a 3D motion design freelancer. I also have a podcast where each week I cover another 3D modeling tool for Cinema 4D. Hello and welcome. Today we are going over the Subdivision surface tool for Cinema 4D and we're going to use it to 3D model something based on some inspiration from real life. So I went to this candy store and I thought that these containers were really interesting that held the candy in bulk, and I thought that they were kind of cool looking, so I thought we could 3D model them and add some candy to them. You can see how low poly these containers are without the subdivision surface on, and then how detailed they look once you add the subdivision surface. So we're going to be going over how to 3D model with this. It's great to speed up your computer to use subdivision surface modeling. It helps your base model be very low poly. I'm excited to talk about it, and I actually got a bunch of candy at that store because it's the best kind of research you can do to decide you're going to 3D model something from a candy store, so you can call buying candy research. So that's fun. I got these gummy sharks and there's gummy Legos. There's so much great stuff in here. Look at this. This is super cool. Have you ever seen a gummy shark before? That's pretty awesome. And then these ones look like Legos. Mints that look like they come in a little Pac-Man arcade game, which is pretty cool. Hopefully you can see that okay on the screen. I hadn't seen these in so many years, and then I saw them at the store and I was like, what? This is awesome. So I got them. But let's go ahead and start 3D modeling. So let's jump into Cinema 4D and get started. I'll go ahead and open up a new file for us to work within. And the very first thing that I'll do is I'll make sure that I am working in inches. You can work in whatever you'd like to work in. I'm working in inches for today, so I'm going to change this also within my preferences, within my units, make sure everything is the same. And now that we've done that, I can go ahead and just begin thinking about how big I want this thing to be. So I think that I'm going to make this relatively 12 by 12 inches. So I'm going to use my guide tool in order to create a bounding box for myself. I'm going to hit the middle mouse button here, and I'll go into the right view over here. I'll grab my guide tool. And we went over the guide tool in another episode. If you're interested in checking that out, we also went over the snap tool. So if I want to, I can snap this to my grid. So we'll do that. And I'm not worrying too much about dimensions right now. I'm just going to draw the basic shape first. I'm using the middle mouse button to come in and out of those four views. If I click the middle mouse button, I come out of that view. If I click on this view with the middle mouse button, I come back into it. I can change this guide type to be spatial by hitting this button right down here. And you can see that this is 900 inches. We don't need this to be 900 inches, so we're going to change this to be 12. And now it is very, very small over here compared to what it was before. Now, as we're working, we just want to use this as a reference, but we don't want to accidentally click on it. So what I like to do is right-click on this and go down to Programming Tags and add in an interaction tag. You'll see our settings come up for the interaction tag within here. And then we can turn off Disable Viewport Selection. Once we do that, this is no longer something we can select. And I can rename this guide Bounding Box. So this is just to help me visualize the dimensions as I'm modeling. And this is a good place to start. So we're going to start off with a cube primitive. So I'll click on our cube over here, and I'll adjust these dimensions to be 12 by 12 by 12, since we decided that's about the size we want our cube to be. And now we want this cube to be within our bounding box. So I'll make this -6 by 6 by 6. And now it's nicely lined up with our bounding box, and that's a good place to start. Now we need to add this cube to a subdivision surface. So I'm going to hold down the Alt key, and I'm going to click on the subdivision surface, and then it'll add the cube within the hierarchy of the subdivision surface. You'll see that something just changed with our cube. Now it's all rounded. Let's turn on our garage shading lines. So to start off with, you can turn on and off your subdivision surface with the Q hotkey. So right now it's on. You see a check mark by here. When I hit Q, now there's an X and it's turned off, and we can see this original mesh. So this original mesh is called your cage. So I'm actually going to rename this cube Container Cage. And I'm going to rename our subdivision surface SS for short, subdivision surface. It's a lot easier than writing out the whole thing, and easier to read in your object manager, I find. So I'll do SS for subdivision surface, and I'll call this container, because that's what we're 3D modeling. And now that we've done all this, we can go ahead and turn back on our cage, and let's start talking about the subdivision surface. So we have these different options here, and this is how it is subdividing the surface. You'll see it's rounding out everything right now, and you can decide how much it's being subdivided in both your viewport and your renderer. So if I turn these down, it's being subdivided by 1. If I turn these up, it's being subdivided by 2, and so on. And you can see this mesh is looking more and more dense compared to our cage, which you can see if you click the Q button. I'm going to take this back to about 2 for right now. And we're going to talk about these. Catmull-Clark. Catmull-Clark is the most common type of subdivision surface. It's good to use if you are exporting out models for other software. When you use Catmull-Clark, your n-gons will be triangulated first, and then they will be subdivided. I could go ahead and just draw an n-gon over here with the polygon pen tool. You don't really need to do this part with me, but you can see how Catmull-Clark handles an n-gon versus Catmull-Clark n-gons handles it. You could see that with Catmull-Clark n-gons, it just handles those n-gons a little bit differently depending on how you want your topology to look. And this will matter more if you're doing something like rigging a character and using a subdivision surface on that character. Open Subdiv, and I think that we'll actually cover this more in depth in another episode, just so that we can get moving on 3D modeling. We aren't going to use this today, but Open Subdiv, Catmull-Clark, these are based on Pixar's settings that they had released, so it's just another option of how you can do this. Catmull-Clark is the most common, and I think this will work fine for us today, actually. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to select these edges, and the way you shape this sphere, or cube rather, is we need to first make it editable. So I'll hit the C hotkey here, and you can actually control the shape of this by clicking on edges and you can weight these. If you hold the period button and click and drag, you'll see that we are actually starting to move the sphere to be weighted to this edge. And you could do that holding two edges too and see what that looks like. And just holding this button and dragging, you'll see that's becoming rounded. If you hold down the period button with control, it won't be as rounded. It'll be a little bit of a sharper point here. So you can see how that affects your mesh, and you can see that even more if you do this with polygons. So the same hotkey as before, if you just hold the period button and click and drag, you'll see how this is affecting it. You can try control the period button, click and drag, and now it's rounded. So that's one way to adjust the shape of this sphere. The other way is you can add in loops. So I'll use ML to add in loops here. And I had another tutorial on adding loops that you can check out if you aren't familiar with loops. And then you could see that this is rounded and added in a nice bevel. And depending on the distance of this loop, if we move it back and forth, is how tight that bevel is. So you have a lot of control over the shape of this here. And there's different ways to model with it. And you can do this with everything from points to edges to polygons. And now that we know that, we can make something that looks like this. So let's go ahead and do that. What I need to do right now is select these two loops here. So this loop and this loop. We need both of them, and we're going to hold the period button and click and drag, and you'll see these are becoming rounded, and that is good. That is what we want. I think we're going to need some more subdivisions, and that is okay, so I'll go ahead and do that. I wanted to delete that other polygon there. We don't need it anymore. I'll increase the subdivision surfaces, and you can see it's becoming a little bit more rounded out there. Something else that I'll want to do, and I'm going to hide our bounding box right now, is just, I'm going to actually need this to have another loop in the center. So we talked about quantize in the past in another episode. If I hold down Shift, it's activating quantize, and I can create an edge loop there right in the center. It snaps to the center with quantize on, and I'm holding Shift again in order to add a loop there. And I'll add in one more here. Maybe I won't have this one. So I'll use MN in order to dissolve that loop. So you can think about where you need them. We still want this to be rounded though. So what we can do is we can select our edges here. And hit the T hotkey and just pull these in a little bit. And now it's looking much more rounded. The bottom of this will need to be flat in order to sit on a table. So what we'll do is we'll grab these two polygons here. And now I'm seeing that this isn't perfectly even across. So I'm actually going to hit undo a couple times, and I'm going to go back into our edge selection we had before, and I'm going to scale these in a little bit differently. So we used the T hotkey before, and we just scaled in like this, but this is also scaling it within the Z. And what if I just want to scale it around this here, where the Y and the X, but not the Z? Then I can click on this here, and I can scale that in so that those edges stay nice and neat and aligned so that we keep that the same. Now that we've done that, we can go ahead and add a base here. I'm going to use inset MW to create an inset here. And you can see that this is already starting to look a little bit better. I'm going to use the fit circle tool. And all of these are tools that we've covered in the past. So if you're new here and you want to learn anything about these, you can do that in one of the other episodes. Now that we have this here, we can lower this, and now we have a nice surface for this to actually sit on a table that's flat. And if we want to tighten this up a little bit, we'll use MW in order to subdivide that again a little bit this way, and we could do it that way. Or we could do something else, and we could hold the period button and click and drag off in space, and that'll start rounding it. This looks pretty good to me. I might actually do both the inset with the weighting, and I think that makes it a little bit nicer of a surface there for it to sit on. I want to grab these edges over here, this loop, and instead of having it go this way, I actually want it to go this way, and I just want to bring in these two sides actually. I want it to be a little bit less wide. So I'll select these. Use the T hotkey again, and this time I'm going to pull in this blue side here. Just a little bit. And that's a better looking shape to me. And you'll notice that we're getting this nice rounded shape, and this is actually on the original containers within the store. If you want to adjust how this is being rounded, again, you can try clicking on these points, and you can see what it looks like if you weight them a little bit. So you could try different things and adjust how rounded they are with the weighting. That seems good to me. Now we need the opening for the container. So I'm going to go back into polygon mode up here. I'll click here and I'll click here. And I'll use MW in order to inset this. And I'll use fit circle, click and drag out here in order to create a circle here. Now I want to weight this circle and round it out a little bit. So this is looking better. I don't like how it's squishing into the surface though, and I want it to go outwards. You'll notice that our axis here is not facing the normal direction, which will make it harder to move outwards, but we learned the tool normal move, one of the first tools we learned. So if you remember that, the hotkey for it is M and then Z. Now we can click and drag, and we're moving this in the normal direction. We didn't even have to adjust the axis to do that. So that's one of the pros of doing that tool. Sometimes that's easier than moving these arrows. Now what we need to do is we need to extrude this. And we actually do need to extrude this in the normal direction. So there's a few different ways you can do that, but I'm going to this time use enable axis. The hotkey for that is also L, and I'm going to click R in order to rotate the axis. And I'm going to hold down Shift, and we're going to use quantize to rotate this in increments, and I'll rotate this 45 degrees so that it lines up perfectly with that side there. And now we can hit the E key in order to go back into the move tool. We can hold down Control and pull this arrow, and you'll notice that's not working. Why is that? Because we're still in enable axis. So you need to hit the L hotkey again in order to come out of that so that you can actually extrude this out. And you can choose how much you want to extrude this out. That's probably fine. For right now, maybe a little bit less. Now our container is getting pretty close to the point where it can hold some candy. So let's go ahead and talk about how to give it a lid. We've used the grid tool in the past and gone over all the settings for it in a previous episode. And I'll leave a link to that below. All of the tools we're using today, I'll leave links to in the description below, but we're going to use that tool to help give us a lid. So what I'll do is I'll click on these surfaces here, holding down Shift. Now that we have these selected, we can align our grid to it. Here, I'm holding a click, align work plane to selection. Now that we have our work plane aligned, we can go ahead and click on our cube primitive, and we'll make it a bit smaller. Let's make it 2.6 inches by 2.6 inches by 1. And actually, no, let's make this 2.6. This needs to be 2.6. The Y can be 1 inch. There we go. That's a little bit better. So we can see that this is perfectly centered here, which is helpful because now that we've done that, we can go ahead and hold down Alt and click on one of these arrows and just slowly increase this until it looks like it fits. So 5.4 looks good. So I'll adjust this to be 5.4 as well. And right now, this lid is looking very cube-like. So we're going to hold Alt, click on Subdivision Surface, and now it is becoming rounded. We'll need to adjust this a little bit further. We've got it pretty close to the right size, but it needs to be a little bit bigger. We'll try 6 by 6 inches. Maybe this will work. It looks really close to me. I think that'll work for right now. And what we can do is hit the Q button to see this edge here. We need to make this editable by hitting the C hotkey in order to select these edge loops. So I'll select this edge loop here on the bottom, hit Q again, hold the period button, and drag this so that it's nice and rounded. And then we'll do the same thing up here for the top. Hold the period button, click and drag until it's nice and rounded. So this is pretty close to where we need it to be. We can actually take this back a little bit if we want it to be a little bit more rounded by just once again using that hotkey. So now that we've done that, we can go into our subdivision surface. I think this needs more subdivisions to look nice and rounded. So I'll give that a try. On this side of our cube, I would like to just select this polygon on the back and delete it because I don't need it anymore. I want to move our work plane back, so I'm going to click on planar mode, and that got it almost the rest of the way there. And then I'll click on use work plane mode. I'll use the R hotkey, hold down shift to go into quantize, and we can just rotate this, holding shift to -90 degrees. And I think this is good enough for me. I just wanted it to be the flat surface on the bottom, and it is, so we're good to go. So now for our lid, we're going to need to name it lid cage to keep things nice and neat and organized, and then this will be SS cage. And we can double check our work and see if we're still pretty much within that bounding box, and we are, so I'm happy with that. Now this lid needs a handle, like the original one in the store. So what we'll do is we'll click on this area here. We'll use MW to inset this. And you'll see it's still looking pretty rounded in the center, which is good. That's what we want when we inset this. Then we can hold Control to extrude this out in the normal direction. While clicking that arrow, we can use MW again to inset this out and dragging my mouse. That looks like a good size there. And then hold Control again, and there we go. That's a nice little handle for that. And you can adjust the proportions however you'd like. It's really personal preference. I think this is looking all right. Now, these surfaces are open, they aren't enclosed, and they would actually have thickness in real life. So what I'd like to do is use the thicken tool, which may sound familiar because again, we've covered it, so I'll leave that in the description as well. But we're going to hold down Alt and we're going to grab our thicken tool. But before we do that, we need to make sure that the subdivision surface is selected, so that when we hold down Alt and add the thicken tool, that's all within the hierarchy of the thicken. And right out of the box, this is going to look a little weird, and that's okay because we can fix it. We do not want our thickness to be 10 inches. That is a little crazy. Let's try 0.1 and see what that looks like. So that looks a bit more reasonable of a thickness for plastic and or glass. Depending on how you choose to texture this, you have options. We'll do the same for the body. So the body's cage is right here, the subdivision surface. So we're going to hold down Alt so that we drop this within the hierarchy of the thicken. We'll grab our thicken here, and you can see this looks ridiculous once again. So we're going to try 0.1 just for right now. You can adjust the position of the thicken. In this case, it makes sense for it to go out, so that's a little bit closer to the lid. And then for the lid, we're just going to need to scale this in a little bit closer, and that's okay. I'll scale this in a little bit closer. We want a little bit of space between these because we're actually going to make it so that these have the part so they can twist on the lid. What we'll need now is a helix, So we'll grab our helix in here, but we actually want to add that to a similar place to where the grid was before. So I'm actually going to move the grid back. I'll click on these surfaces here so that it's nice and centered when we move the grid. And it's okay to move this grid several times. I'll name this thicken container, and this one will be called thicken cage. Now both of these are going to need a helix, so I'm holding a click and I'm dropping in our helix over here. It's going to be way too big, so we'll try 2.5 as the start radius, and then 2.5 as the end radius. And then the height is way too much. We need this to be closer to 1 inch. Now you can see we have our helix here. If I solo it, we have a helix and it is going the wrong way. So we'll try these different options here and see if they align it correct. This looks like it'll line up pretty closely. That was a guesstimate for the sizing. I may hide this part for right now. I'm holding Control and double clicking to hide it so that we can see the interior a little bit better as we work. So this is a good start. I may adjust the height just a little bit, so I'm going to hold Alt, click on the arrow, and adjust it in smaller increments. Alt just allows you to adjust this in smaller increments than just clicking on that arrow and dragging. I'll move this up a little tiny bit, and we're going to need a circle. So we're going to sweep this circle around the helix using a sweep. We've talked about the sweep, and the reason why we're using this is so that we create those ridges for this to twist on. Here's our sweep right over here. We have this and we have this. Just our circle is really large and it's being rotated around. We're going to change our circle to be 0.01. And then we can just slowly increase this. Not as fast as that, just to see what's a good size. Let's try actually 0.2. That's too big. 0.05. We can adjust the size of our helix a little bit if needed. So the goal is just to have this look right when it's rendering, and this is close enough for what we need. Just when this is transparent, we want a little bit of that edge to show in order to make it look realistic. And we'll call this sweep lid, and then we'll copy and paste this and call this one sweep container. And then we can move the sweep for the container just slightly down so that one twists around the other. And the sweep container is going to need to be down here, and the sweep lid is going to be up here. I'm going to hold down Alt to add a null to this, and I'll drop our cage in here. Our container in here. I'm going to rename this. Lid. This is our lid. that'll be a little easier to remember. And then I can name this lid. And then this is going to need its own. Now this is neat and organized. We need to unhide this. And I'll put our grid back to where it was before. There we go. And now I want to add in a backdrop. So we're really getting close here. This is looking good. And we actually need to put some candy in here. So for that, I'm going to turn off the lid in entirety. And we'll work a little bit more on this container because it's getting real close, but it still needs some work. I'll use MZ to move this in the normal direction, just up a little bit. And I'll hold down the period button and just try rounding this out. I might actually try this method this time. But we're going to need to delete this surface here. So now that we've moved that up, we need to go ahead and delete this entire surface here so that there's a hole. And you can see that our thicken generator that's thickening this entire container just automatically updated it so it looks good. And now that we have that done, we need to add some candy in here. So what I'm gonna do is we're going to make some candy out of a sphere. I'll make this 0.5 perhaps, and we'll drop this within a cloner. We haven't really covered the cloner yet, so just follow along and do your best. And this will at least get you familiar with the basics of it. But we want to clone this. So now that this is within the cloner and the sphere is going to be our candy, I'll name the cloner Cloner Candy. Now we can adjust the number in the grid formation, and we can adjust their spacing too. So let's make the spacing 1 inch by 1 inch by, or actually 2 inches sounds good, 2 by 2 by 2. And you can begin to see our grid. We can add more in the Y direction, we can add more in the X direction, we can add more in the Z direction. Let's just try this for right now. I'll try 1.5 just to get these a little closer. So now we have a good looking group of candies. I'm going to make these editable now with the C hotkey. So now we have this long list of candy, and we can use the placement tool actually to move these. So I need to be in model mode here. And then I want to select the children of this. So you can see all of those are selected. I right-clicked and chose Select Children. It's listed within here. Select Children, if you're wondering where that is. You can hit Control to deselect the null if you'd like even. And then we have the dynamic place over here, which is a ton of fun. And I'm going to grab this purple handle, and you can make these come in closer, further out. But you'll see that this isn't really adjusting it the way we'd like it to. So what we need to do is change this to Object, and that will help. The next thing that will help is to decrease grouping. And then the next thing that will help is to increase accuracy. And then we also need to change our scale to something smaller. This is the most accurate scale, honestly. A smaller one. And now these are starting to collide, which is what we want. And we have a big clump of, these could be gumballs or chocolates or, you know, whatever you want them to be. And I'm going to just change this to lines so that I can see the inside of here. Hit the middle mouse button to see what's going on. A little bit easier. I just want to get this in the general center area. I don't want it intersecting the walls though, because now I'm going to turn on the dynamic place again. Now that this is in here, we can visualize our colliders if we'd like to. And now that we can visualize our colliders, you can see that this is actually going to collide with the inside of our container. And you can move this. And it looks pretty accurate the way that it falls within the container. And that looks good to me. So if you want more, you can always copy, paste, move these up, and then use the dynamic place once again to collide these on top of the other ones. And you can pretty much do that as many times as you see fit. You just don't want it to be colliding with those walls there. Looks like it might be a little bit. Still worked though. So there you go. And you could texture all of these as well. It's pretty fun. I'll go back into garage shading lines. I thought I had grouped these together, but I guess not. Alt-G is the hotkey to group things, which is especially useful in this case. So that's all of our candy grouped together. I'll name this Cloner Candy 2. And we can unhide our lid, since that won't mess up our dynamic place anymore. So this pretty much wraps up today's episode on the subdivision surface. I am going to go more into depth in it in the future, but I think this was a nice introduction to the tool. And I hope you'll stay tuned for future episodes. We're going to cover more of this technique in the future and a lot of others. We go over another 3D modeling tool each week. This one will take a couple of weeks, but I hope to see you again here next week. And thank you so much for 3D modeling with me.